Welcome to the Christopher Hall Training Podcast, where we're going to be talking about the importance of movement for lower back pain. It's probably the biggest part of a rehab plan because it just takes up so much more of the time, because you're only doing 30 minutes, an hour of exercise, the rest of the time is movement. So we've got to bring this into the conversation when we talk about low back pain, and that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to break this episode up into three parts. So first of all, we're going to sort of describe movement, describe the different movements, put a bit of context around how we use movement for lower back pain. Then we're going to go a little bit more into a specific example of how we would put something together when it comes to movement and lower back pain. And then eventually we'll talk about exercise right at the end in part number 3. So if you were to join my coaching program, which is How to Overcome Lower Back Pain, the consultation and coaching, which you can click down below. So if you join onto that and go for the coaching, you go through a process on the online portal where we've got, or what I describe as, core skills and fundamental movements. So these are exactly what they are. They are core skills that you need to be able to overcome lower back pain, and they are the fundamental movements that go towards overcoming lower back pain. So we need to put these two together, and there are certain elements of that need to be put together. Now, one of the core skills, and probably the first and most important one, because it's the umbrella term, if you will, is joint awareness. What is joint awareness? Essentially, it's moving well and having a conscious bodily awareness of what your body is doing when it is doing it. Now, with regards to the movements that we're talking about, when you've got this, or when you want to have this body awareness, it's bending, it's lifting, it's carrying, it's walking, it's running, it's pushing, it's pulling, it's getting up, it's rotating. You could even include in this, although it's not moving, but it's more posture, sitting and standing as well. So those, at a very basic level, is what your body does. There are lots of ways of lifting, there are lots of ways of rotating and getting up, but essentially that's what we're doing. We're getting up out of a seat, we're getting into a seat, we're getting up off the floor, we're getting down onto the floor, so on and so forth. And there are different ways in which we do that. So those are the fundamental movements that we need to have a grasp of. And basically the core skills are what underlie that. So it's what you use your body for. Now, before we even get to that point, we have to first understand the triggers, because there could be certain movements, there could be certain postures that are, let's just say, not as good as they could be, which are making the problem worse. So by upgrading the movement and upgrading the posture, what we're able to do is take a significant chunk of the cause of the problem away. There may be other ones, and there may be other parts to it, but when it comes to movement, upgrading the movement, improving how you move and the way that you do it, is going to take away large chunks of the problem, let's say. So first of all, we have to understand the triggers, and that's what we do first in the coaching anyway. If you go through and put your name, your details in, you get sent all the questionnaires. So we start understanding the triggers from the off, and it's only when we get you booked in, we get the consultation going, we get you into the online portal, that we can start actually upgrading the movement, if you will. So what we're now going to do is we're now going to sort of dig a little bit deeper into a specific example of how we would go about using these fundamental movements and how we would go about using these core skills within it. And what we're going to do is we're going to use getting up out of a chair as an example. And I've chosen getting up out of a chair because it's an everyday thing that probably every person will do. So in some respects, it's relatable. Now, this will depend if it's your trigger, how much you can relate to it, but everyone will do it. So what we need to be able to do is break down the getting up movement. Now, what most people will do is they will sort of throw themselves up out of the chair and they won't really be conscious of what their body's doing. So I could say, I could ask you, get up out the chair and sit yourself back down. Okay, what did your hips do in that? What did your knees do in that? Did they buckle in? Did they push out? Did they stay straight? What did your spine do during that? Could you feel your core muscles working? What did your body do? Did you sort of throw yourself up? Did you get up in a controlled way? So that is essentially the questions to be asked to understand how much body awareness you had. If you had a very detailed body awareness, you'd be able to answer those questions. This is what my spine did, this is what my knees did, this is what my hips did, this is what my core muscles did, this is what my glute muscles did, this is the position my feet were on the floor, I got myself up in a controlled way, this is what my head and my torso did, so on and so forth. So I didn't use my arms as momentum to help me get up, so on and so forth. So throughout that movement, you're very aware of what you were doing. Now, if you weren't aware, you would just say, I have no idea, I was just completing the task of being in the seat and then getting up out of the seat. So that's the general conversation that would be had, is you're not aware of what your body was doing and you just sort of got up out of the seat. The task was completed. It's like, okay, I've done that. Right, move on to the next one. But what we don't realise is that could be that lack of awareness of the body could be causing a problem because of the lack of potential muscle contraction, because of the rounding of the spine, because of the inactivity of the glutes, because of the sort of the hoiking and the momentum used to get the body up is just putting unnecessary pressure on the body. So what we need to do is we need to sort of delve in and start improving that. And we need to start it in very simple ways. So this is an example of how the fundamental movement works, of getting up out of a seat and then applying in what I describe as the core skills. And we're going to focus on only a few of the core skills because they're probably the most apparent for this example. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to be in what would be described as a neutral posture. So basically the first thing to do is sit up straight, get the spine in a neutral posture, and get yourself sitting up on the pelvis, not like drop down like this, where you're kind of dumping back into the pelvis, but you're sort of up on the pelvis and you're upright. So you've got that neutral posture of the spine. So that's sort of the first thing. The next thing to do is bracing the abdominals lightly, because by getting the spine into that neutral posture, you're going to be minimizing the stress to the spine. So it's going to be able to distribute load evenly around the spine. When we brace, we stabilize that position, and also the muscle tension will also take some of the load as well. So again, it will distribute load further away from the spine and have it moved around the torso. So just by doing those couple of things, we're already minimizing stress to the spine. The next thing to do would be move yourself towards the front edge of the seat. So you're in that position, so you would then move yourself to the front edge. Now if you've got like armrests, you can just sort of use your arms and move yourself to the edge. But again, it would be that sort of neutral posture with a light brace. Again, it doesn't need to be a heavy brace. Well, it depends on what stage your lower back pain is at, how severe it is, so on and so forth. But we're just going to go with, we're not going to use a huge brace. It's just going to be relatively light. So we would go for that. What we then need to do is bring the ankles back underneath us, if that makes sense. So we don't want our feet out in front. We want the ankles right back. All that does is just a center of gravity thing. So we don't then have to use the momentum to get us up, because it's the foot position that requires us to sort of throw ourselves up. If we can get the foot position right, we can literally just stand straight up once we're on the edge of the seat. Now we can start to think about the movement. Now that we've got the ankles underneath our body, we can start to think about the movement. So what we now need to do, with regards to the core skills, we've used neutral spine, which is one of the core skills. We've got the abdominal brace, which is the other, or another core skill. What we're now going to do is a hip hinge. But what we've got to be able to do is maintain the neutral spine and the brace within that hip hinge. And all the hip hinges, that is where we're going to get the movement from. So what we want to do is we don't want to straighten our knees as we stand up. We want to push our hips forward and up. That then will start to get the glutes active. So it's just then a case of bringing all of this together in that one movement. We've got the neutral spine, we've got the brace, we've then got the ankles underneath, which is just helping with the centre of gravity. And then we as we stand up, we essentially extend the hip or unhinge the hip, maintain the neutral spine throughout. So what we may find ourselves doing is leaning forward slightly, but we're not leaning forward from the spine and down like that. We're leaning forward from the hips and maintaining the neutral spine. This is how we develop this body awareness. But because people aren't necessarily that aware of what their body's doing, it takes a lot of mental energy and a lot of processing to get to that point that, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks down the line, all of this is just very natural. There's no expenditure of energy. You just go into the position and you just do the movement. You minimize the stress on the lower back. So it's very much, we need to get to a point where we use a lot of mental energy and we wonder, why am I doing this? Oh, this is really difficult. Oh, I can't do this and I can't do that. You've got to persist with all that, and we've got to follow these steps to improve the movement, to then minimize the stress on the lower back, and that will then help reduce the pain, and then therefore we can then build an exercise which we'll talk about in the next part. So what we've talked about so far with regards to getting up out of the seat are building the awareness of what the body's doing. So we're not just throwing ourselves up, knees flopping all over the place, glutes not active, abdominal wall not active, spine could be doing anything. We're not really hinging from the hip, we're more straightening from the knee and things like that. So we've kind of gone beyond that, and we're now starting to get up in a much more, and I will say it, sort of robotic way, which again needs to be done to start with. So it needs to be very controlled, very robotic, very, I don't know, unnatural, but that's mainly because it's a new activity. So what we've done is we've taken the fundamental movement of getting up out of a seat and we've applied the core skill, or some of the core skills to it. So we've applied the neutral spine, the brace, and the hip hinge, or the hip unhinging, if you will. And then what that's starting to do, that's starting to get the abdominals active, that's starting to get the gluteal muscles active, which is then allowing us to minimize the stress and the load on the lower back and put that load where it's meant to go, through the muscles, which is where it can be coped with that much more effectively. So why are we starting with movement before exercise? There's a lot of videos, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of content you can find on YouTube, on the internet, and it's all about exercise. 4 best exercises, 10 best exercises, 7 core exercises, all these different exercises that you could be doing to overcome lower back pain. So why are we starting with movement, or why am I starting with movement? And all the people that I work with, why are we starting with upgrading the movement and taking them through these core skills and the fundamental movements? Well, it's what you're doing every single day. So it's the first thing that you will do when you get up out of bed. You will get up out of bed. Again, sort of going through that process of rolling over, putting your feet on the floor, and then getting up out of bed. So it's happening every single day. It's minimizing load through the spine. So it's reducing load through the spine. And because we're doing it every day, and we're not just doing it in this fixed half an hour or this hour, it's a much more effective way of reducing load over the day. Because if we're only doing it for the half an hour or the hour, what's happening to the other, I don't know, let's say 15 hours of being awake or whatever, 16 hours of being awake? We're then just adding more load on. And every time we add load on, we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to overcome lower back pain. We're actually adding to the problem. So what we need to try and do is use our movement, use these fundamental movements to be able to upgrade the movement, start to reduce the pain. And what that then allows us to do is start then to build in the exercise where we can essentially sort of make the body more robust, strengthen it, stabilize it, build the endurance, so we can then go through and build all the different components that we need. But if we're constantly in pain, that's then not really going to be terribly helpful when it comes to all those other things that we're going to be doing with exercise anyway. On the back of that, it reduces the risk of pain. So again, we are putting our body in a position, as I've mentioned with the neutral spine, that spreads the load more easily. The brace activates muscles, which then will again spread the load more evenly around the torso. So we're reducing the potential occurrence of pain in the future, because every time we do a poor movement, we put a little token in the back pain account. Every time we do a good movement, we put a token in the pain-free account. So what we need to try and do is put as many tokens in the pain-free account so we get a massive margin of error. So if we just make a few posture errors or a few movement errors, it's really not a problem, because this is our sort of pain tolerance floor, if you will, and we're right up here. So if we can keep that up, we've got a massive margin of error in between. So we are minimizing the risk of pain in the future. We're upgrading movement, which does all of that, and in some respects this is the underlying principle of all of this, and probably the reason why we're doing all of this. And it's very simple. It's about movement habits and how we develop these habits in the brain. As I mentioned earlier, it takes a long time. It can feel quite unnatural. It can feel quite uncomfortable upgrading your movement and just getting up better and walking around better and lifting things up better. But over time that becomes natural. And that's because it feels very unnatural to start with, because you don't have the what are called engrams in your brain. They're not in there, because they're just like little tape players or little MP3 tracks that your brain is literally pressing play on. So you just press play and you stand up. You press play, you lift up. But at the moment, you've got very poor quality movement engrams or movement habits. We need to create new ones of these and replace these old ones. And that's what we're doing. Because the brain is plastic, it can remodel itself. That's known as neuroplasticity. And then with the repetition of it, we've then got the myelination, which is basically every time we do it, we reinforce that pattern, we reinforce that engram, and it becomes stronger. So not only do we want the body to become strong, we want the mind to become stronger along with it. And by upgrading the movement, by mentally, consciously contracting the necessary muscles, we go about doing that. So it's very important that we build all of this up and make sure that we are essentially neuroplastically remodeling the brain with our habits, which is the myelination part to it, because it's just sending the signal in, I'm using this, I'm using this, I'm using this, and it does it all the way through that it's using it. That builds and reinforces it, and then once we've established these patterns, that's when it becomes natural, that's when it becomes, let's just say, effortless, or a lot less effort goes into it. So we need to think about it in that way and build our movement slowly but surely, which will essentially reduce our risk of pain in the future. Now we can finally talk about exercise, because what's happened over this process is we've reduced pain. So we've used our movement, we've used our postures to reduce the pain, to ease the stress on the body, and we can now start thinking about getting some exercise involved. So where do we start with exercise? Because again, it's not as simple as just go into a video which says the 10 best exercises. Again, we need to understand which are the most effective exercises. That's what the coaching's all about. That's what I'm here to do for you, is listen to your body and listen to you as a person, and find the best exercises for you. Because what may be the 4 best for one person may be the 4 not so good for another person, or there may be just 2 of them which is the best, or maybe and then a 3rd and a 4th one from somewhere else. So how do we do it? Well, similar to what we've talked about before. So we use this this principle of neuroplasticity and myelination. we also use the principle of keeping things simple. So we need to start with simple exercises, because what we need to be able to do is, again, apply the core skills to the exercise. So for example, when we go into a plank exercise, which everyone knows, we go down onto the elbows, we've got your straight body, we need to be able to get into the neutral spine, and we need to be able to brace the abdominals. So when most people go into a plank, do they do that? Do they consciously do that? Do they know the position they're in? Do they have to look in a mirror to get into the right position, or can they just go into the position without looking in a mirror? These are all the things that we need to sort of understand. So we need to start with a simple exercise, because if we've got big, complicated movements, we won't be able to comprehend that in the brain, because there's too many things going on. Like with the getting up example, there's a lot of things. What are my ankles doing? What are my knees doing? What are my hips doing? What's my torso doing? What are my glute muscles doing? What are my abdominal muscles doing? What's my spine doing? So we've got all these different things going on that we need to comprehend. When we go into a plank, all I got to think about is my spine in the right position and is my tummy tight? That's all I got to think about. And then I just got to hold. And obviously we can make that easier and harder depending on the person. So in that regard, it's relatively simple. So we start with simple exercises. Again, once we develop that ability to know the position of the spine and to brace the abdominals, we can then start adding in various other parts to it. So we would start with simple static exercises to, again, get the mind-muscle connection, get the proprioception or the awareness of the body in here. Then we can start moving. Then we can start getting you up on your feet. Then we can start moving into chopping exercises where arms and legs are involved. But we might just start with the arms to be involved and then move on to the legs and then the arms and the legs. So we're moving from simple static exercises into simple dynamic exercises into then more complex dynamic or movement exercises. So we're building all of this, as well as, yes, we've worked on the movement, but we're then building this and loading all of that, because it's all well and good improving the movement. That will go a long way to getting you where you want to get. But then what we have to do is then start using load. And that's the complication with exercise. It's not necessarily the proprioception and the awareness of the body part to it. It's more the load, because that changes a lot of the dynamics of how the body wants to work and how it deals with movement. So it's very much, we need to build all of this in this sequential way to be able to overcome lower back pain as a whole. So it's not just to reduce it, it's to then rebuild the body back stronger to be able to get it to do what we want it to do, which is essentially not be in pain. Your movement is going to go a long way to that, and then basically we're using exercise to rebuild the structure of the muscles, and how the muscles work within your movement is how we need to go about doing it. And that is the core skills, that is the fundamental movements, and then building in the necessary exercises, but again, always thinking about what I describe as joint awareness, which is essentially moving well and being aware of what your body's doing and when. Many thanks for watching this episode of the podcast. If you've liked the content, please do hit the like button below. If you've learned something new, hit the thanks button below. If you have any comments or questions, then please do leave that down in the comment section below. And if you want to watch more tutorials like this, then please do hit the subscribe button and the bell icon.